All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here today with Todd White. How are you today, Todd?
Awesome, Rachel. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm so happy you're here. I'm excited to dive into all things wine, chat a little bit about your story, chat about some nutrition, fitness, metabolic flexibility. We chat about that off air a little bit, so we can just dive into all the things. Before we get started, do you want to just give a little bit of your background, maybe kind of tell us your story and how you got to where you are today?
Well, wow, that's a long, because I'm older, that's a long story. But let me just say kind of what got me to where I am at Dry Farm Wines and sort of my focus on helping people optimize the human experience and optimize drinking, right? So, our ethos is not really around wine. Our ethos is around helping people optimize the life experience. And so I've been a biohacker. I'm sure that's a pretty familiar term to you. The way I would define biohacking is it's the art and science of how we employ our behavior to positively influence our neurological or biological outcome. And the most common biohack is probably dieting, right? And so it's any alteration of our behavior that has hopefully a positive impact on our biological or neurological outcome. I've been a biohacker since probably for long before it was called biohacking. I was interested in just optimizing the life experience and for longevity and health and wellness and vanity reasons as well. So, so about 5 or 6 years ago, I started experimenting with the ketogenic diet. Long before keto was popular in the mainstream, but it had reached the biohacking circles, and I started experimenting. And for a couple of years, I was therapeutically ketogenic, which is different than what I am today. Today, I'm what I would call a modified ketogenic diet or something more like Atkins, very low carb. A therapeutic ketogenic diet is much higher in fat than what I eat today. So I was eating 80 or 85% fat when I was therapeutically ketogenic, but that becomes a bit boring after a while. And so I experimented with it for a couple of years with terrific results, and I enjoyed the cognitive benefits and other benefits from it. But I'm in the taste business. I'm in the wine business, and I love, even though I only eat once per day now, I love the taste of things. And so but when I started experimenting with the ketogenic diet, I was also a lifelong wine aficionado, and I've been drinking wine since I was 9 years old, and love wine, right? In fact, I live in the Napa Valley, which is the most important wine appellation in North America. I don't drink domestic wines, and we can talk about why in a moment, but, I live in the wine country. I've lived here for a long time. But when I became ketogenic, I noticed that I wasn't able to drink conventional wines anymore. They were making me feel bad. I would get drunk easier, didn't like that, having brain fog and hangovers, and I didn't know what was causing it. So, it's quite common side effect that people have a lower tolerance of alcohol when they go keto. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it was just the alcohol, and it was more than that. And I thought maybe it was because I was getting older and, just wasn't metabolizing alcohol as well or processing alcohol as well. And so this is before I knew anything about the business I'm in now, which is in the natural wine business. This thing with natural wines is that it's a very confusing term to consumers because I say, I think you should drink natural wine. There's aren't all wines natural? And for the reasons I'm about to describe to you, they're not. Mm-hmm. So conventional wines, most of the wines you see in the grocery store are anything but natural. And we're going to talk about organic and natural, because this is all can be confusing. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like all natural wines are organic, but not all organic wines are natural. And then natural has sort of a funny use in the food industry, right? Sometimes people say natural trying to infer that it's healthy, but it's really not. So that in of itself is a confusing term. But to get started off with sort of what's wrong with wine today, right? And why it's not healthy and how it got there, right? So wine's been made for over 9,000 years in the world. And wine for most of that 9,000 years was made naturally, except for the last 50 years. And what happened in the last 50 years in the wine business is the same thing that's happened in the food supply. So there's been massive corporate consolidation. There are 9 or 10 food companies that basically control most of the food we eat that is not local, right? Same thing has happened in the wine business. So in the wine industry in the United States, 52% of all the wines you see on store shelves are made by just 3 giant conglomerates. Now you don't know that because they hide behind thousands of brands and labels to confuse you. They don't want you to know that you're drinking from a massive wine factory located in Central California. They want you to believe that you're drinking from a chateau or a farmhouse, right? So that's how they sell this. The top 30 U.S. wine companies make over 70% of U.S. wines. So again, when you go into the grocery store or you go into, a bottle shop, then most of what you see there is being made by just a handful of people. And these are multi-billion-dollar marketing conglomerates who are very slick and smart, right? They don't want you to know that. Now, the other thing they don't want you to know is that there are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking. And the reason that most consumers don't know about these additives is because the wine industry has spent millions of dollars in lobby money to keep wine contents labeling off of bottles. So wine is the only major food product that doesn't have a contents label or any nutritional information. But forget about the nutritional information. It doesn't contain even contents label. And the reason that it doesn't contain a contents label is because they don't want you to know what's really in it. What they want you to believe is just fermented grape juice, but that's not true. There are 76 of these additives, and some of them are natural, and a handful of them are quite toxic. And so, now if you want to drink these additives, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is the lack of transparency. So I think there should be a contents label on every wine bottle, and you can decide if you want to drink these additives or not. And if a wine bottle had a contents label on it, it would look just like the rest of processed food. It'd be this triangular label, right, with a whole bunch of stuff on it that you never heard of, don't know how to pronounce it, don't know what it is. Same thing you see on all other packaged foods, unless they're frozen vegetables, which are flash frozen fresh, right? But any other kind of packaged food that comes in a box or a bag has got that label on it with a bunch of stuff you've never heard of. So the same thing would be true for wine. So when I started investigating the wine industry, this is before I was dry farm wines. I was just trying to find a healthier way for me to drink, right? And so I started looking at lower alcohol wines, and then I stumbled upon the natural wine movement, which was just getting underway in central France. I mentioned earlier I don't drink domestic wine. There are no wines grown in the United States that meet all of our criteria for purity and health. And so our wines come primarily from Europe, and then we have 4 growers in South Africa and 4 in South America. And so what is important for people to know is why they should drink natural wine, why they shouldn't drink conventional wines, and how to go about doing that. It's not easy, right? Because, again, the natural wine movement is really, really small. We're the largest buyer and seller of natural wines in the world. Natural wines are less than 0.1% of wine production worldwide. And so it's hard to find. There's no labeling or certification standard for it. Now, there is for organic. We'll talk about the difference between organic and natural, but the problem is it's all confusing. There's no certifying body for it. Now, Dry Farm Wines, my company, has a certification that we guarantee, and we have a certification process, but there's no natural wine certification anywhere in the world. So it's a very confusing a very confusing space for people to try and navigate.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's dive into it a little bit so we can make it less confusing. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, do you want to start with maybe just explaining what the term dry farms means?
Dry farm wines. So the term dry farming, name of my company is Dry Farm Wines, but dry farming simply means that the agriculture that you're growing, in this case grapes, are not irrigated. So there are other agricultural products that can also and are dry farmed, but in this particular case, it means that the vineyards and the grapevines receive no irrigation. And that's critically important. Our company is named around that concept. It's critically important because dry farming produces a healthier vine, healthier fruit, better fruit, and just a more complex and delicious wine. And the reason you irrigate, and more than 99.9% of U.S. vineyards are irrigated. It's against the law. It's a crime to irrigate in most of Europe. And the reason being is Europeans who've been making wines for over 3,000 years know what we know. The moment you irrigate a grapevine, you fundamentally change the character of the fruit. And the reason you're doing that is because physiologically, you're changing the character of the vine and how it ripens fruit and how it accesses nutrient, minerals, and water, how it accesses nutrition. See, in an irrigated grapevine, you have a root ball that's about 3 feet wide and about 3 feet deep, 4 feet deep. Because this vine gets all of its water and its nutrient from a little tube, a little drip tube just above the trunk. That's how it gets fed water and nutrient in the way of liquid nitrogen. So an unirrigated grapevine can have a root structure at maturity that can be 40 or 50 feet deep. And the reason for that is because this grapevine, which is struggling, and we know that struggle in all plants creates a higher character of fruit and of strength for the plant. If it isn't producing a fruit, it makes for a stronger plant when it struggles. Tons of science around this, homeosis, a ton of science around it. And so when a grapevine struggles, what it's doing is looking for nutrient and water. And it's these tiny capillary-like roots that are breaking apart tiny particles of soil and mineral, rock, right, as it's looking for moisture and nutrient. Common sense will tell you that that produces a higher quality fruit than a lazy vine that gets fed liquid nitrogen and water from the surface. And so, which is why it's illegal in most of Europe to irrigate a grapevine. So we don't allow irrigation. Now, it's important to let's distinguish quickly about some of the more confusing terms. So, which is natural wine, organic wine, and conventional wine. So here's what a natural wine means. When someone says this is a natural wine, it simply means that this fruit is organically or biodynamically farmed, and biodynamic is a prescriptive advanced form of organic farming. Number two, a natural wine is always fermented with wild native yeast. And what does that mean? Well, on the skin of every grape berry at the time of harvest anywhere in the world is a white, waxy looking film on the outside of the berry. And that grape berry with this waxy film on it, that's yeast. And it's collected in through the air. It's called wild native yeast. It is native and wild to the vineyard where the grape is grown. Now, all grapes have this at the time of harvest. But what happens with conventional wines is that they introduce sulfur dioxide. So when you make wine, you press the juice from the berries. The juice goes into a tank. And the tank is filled with grape juice, which is filled with sugar. Now, we're going to get to sugar in a moment because the most common question we get is, how are your wines sugar-free? So we'll get to that in a second. We'll talk about the dry farm wine certification in a moment. But for now, let's just talk about the difference between a natural wine and a conventional wine. So natural wine is fermented with these wild native yeasts. Now here's what's happening with conventional wines. They introduce sulfur dioxide to the tank, which is full of juice, to kill the native wild yeast so that they can inoculate it with a genetically modified lab-grown yeast. Now the reason they do that, we don't know what this means from a health point of view, but the reason they do that is because these wild native yeast are quite fragile and they're difficult to work with, and you can't make wine in large volumes with them. They're too unstable. Which is why natural wine producers are very small, very small production, because you just can't make wine in large quantities with these unstable yeast. Also, alcohol levels, if they get too high, they will kill the wild native yeast. The genetically modified lab-grown yeast are modified to live in a higher alcohol environment. And the third reason they use these conventional yeast is that they come in flavor profiles. So let's say that you grow a substandard grape in some industrial farmland in Central California, and you want it to taste like it's from Italy. They have a yeast for that. Right?
Wow.
And so just like you have different yeast strains for bread and so on and so forth, the yeast can be modified to impact and create flavor, different types of flavor profiles. So that's the reason that commercial winemakers use these lab-grown yeast. Now again, we don't know what this means from a health point of view. It's just that there are 3 attributes that make a natural wine. First, organic or biodynamic farming. Second, fermentation only with wild native yeast. And number 3, there's no additives. So no adjustments, nothing in, nothing out. There are many common additives in commercial wines, including color agents and chemicals used to control bacterial infections. In making wine, bacterial faults are very common, and there are chemicals used to correct those faults. And so now let's talk about natural wine and dry farm wines, my company, for a moment, because we have a certification process. So our criteria for natural wines is much higher than just being natural. So we require that they be irrigation free. And just on the farms that we work, that's just on the number of farmers that we work with around the world, dry farming, just on the farms we work with, saves 1.8 billion gallons of water a year.
Wow.
And so not only is it better for the plant, not only does it produce a healthier fruit in the way of polyphenols, and we'll get to that in a moment, but it also is great for the planet, right? And so they're dry farmed. Not all natural wines are dry farmed. Most are, but not all. We require it. So they're dry farmed, they're organically or biodynamically farmed, they're fermented with wild native yeast. They must be sugar-free, and we'll come back to that in a moment, because I'm ketogenic. And as I told you before we started recording, I'm finishing a 5-day water fast tomorrow night. And so, we're rabidly anti-sugar. I think sugar is the most widely abused addictive drug on the planet. And so we think it's very dangerous. So is alcohol, and I'll get to that in a second. So they're sugar-free, and they're also additive-free and low alcohol. So we don't accept any wine over 12.5% alcohol by volume. And we sell wine as low as 7%. Average American wine is around 15%. Now, the difference between 11 and 15% probably doesn't sound that much, but it's a vast difference in the amount of alcohol you're consuming. And I said we get to alcohol in a moment. It surprises people to learn or to hear me, the wine guy, say that alcohol is a very dangerous neurotoxin. Now, I happen to love wine. I don't love alcohol, right? I love drinking wine. I don't love drinking excess amounts of alcohol. A, I don't think it's healthy. B, I don't like how it makes me feel either drinking it or afterwards, right? And so that's the reason that we've led a lower alcohol discussion on wines. The wines I drink generally are between 10 and 11%. I like the taste of lower alcohol wines. I also like the effect of lower alcohol wines. And so and then they're additive free. So that's what separates us from just natural wines. We have a number of criteria and certifications that are over and above just natural. And so let me go straight over to sugar for a moment, because that's in how wines, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the most common questions we get are, how are your wines sugar-free? Isn't there sugar in grape juice? Yes, there is, but let's talk about how wine is made for a moment. So wine is the juice is pressed from the grapes, goes over into a tank, and then it begins a fermentation. In natural wines, it's called a spontaneous fermentation because the yeast is already present in the tank. And once it comes to a temperature that the yeast will activate, yeast won't activate if it's too cold. So once it comes to a temperature and the yeast activates, it activates spontaneously. You don't have to do anything to it because the yeast is already in the grape juice. In commercial wines, as I mentioned, what they do is dump sulfur dioxide in to kill the native yeast, and then they inoculate it with this genetically modified lab-grown yeast. From the point of inoculation, everything acts kind of the same. So it doesn't matter which yeast you use, the rest of the process kind of works out the same. The yeast will eat the sugar, like the little Pac-Man, just these yeast are eating sugar. That's their food source. And they will eat all the available sugar. When they eat all the available sugar, they'll die because they don't have any food source. That's called a fully fermented wine, and that wine will be sugar-free. Now, we do independent lab testing on every wine to ensure it's sugar-free. And we do other lab tests as well. We'll come to that in a moment. But here's what happens in conventional wines and how sugar gets in conventional wines. They don't add sugar. What happens is that prior to the fermentation completing, they again introduce sulfur dioxide to the wine juice, killing the yeast they put in there, right, prior to the completion of fermentation. So there's this little device that's in the wine tank during fermentation that will tell you, you can see exactly how much sugar is left in the juice, right? It's just a very simple device, but it kind of floats and it shows you how much sugar is left in the juice. And so when the desired amount of sugar is remaining in the wine, then they will use sulfur dioxide to kill the yeast, and they break the fermentation process, leaving what's known in the industry as residual sugar, or RS, in the wine. Now, why do they do that? Well, sugar in wine provides mouthfeel. It provides that long finish. It provides a lushness, a denseness to the wine that Americans like, right? Now, your average American doesn't eat like you and I, right? We eat light and fresh and clean, and so that's the way we want our wine to taste. But see, the average American doesn't eat that way. They want something that's richer, bigger, and bolder, right? That because their palate has been deadened and killed from years of abuse of sugar and processed foods, and so they need this boldness, they need this thickness, they need this robust taste in order to actually taste it. Our wines are just the opposite. They're light and fresh, and they complement a diet like you and I have and your listeners have, right? And so that's the reason that our wines have been so popular, is they don't taste like these manufactured products. They taste like something wholesome and with spirit and very, very fresh. And so now one final point, or two final points, and then maybe you have some questions, but which is how does red wine get red? Right? So a lot of people don't know this. It's also important, the same reason is why red wines are thought to be healthier than white wines. And that has to do with the polyphenol, flavonoid, antiflavonoids, but they all fall under the polyphenol umbrella, right? There are many, but generally they're just known as polyphenols. There are about 800 polyphenol compounds in red wines, and there are just over 200 in white wines, which is why red wines are generally thought to be healthier. Now, how did red wine get these 800 polyphenols versus the 200 in red wine and white wines? And that's because of how you make a red wine. So how red wine gets its color is not from the juice. If you squeeze the juice of a red wine grape and you squeeze the juice of a white wine grape, they're both clear or near clear. Red wine gets its color from contact with the skin and the seeds and stems. And that's also how red wine gets its tannin structure. So unlike white wine, when you make white wine, you press the juice from the skins and the juice goes free run into a tank. And then you begin the fermentation process and you have white, relatively clear wine. In red wine, you press the juice from the skins, it goes into the tank, but then you remove the skins and the seeds and the stems from the bladder of the press and you put it in the tank. And then it macerates or soaks. The skins will soak in the juice for a period of several days to several weeks, depending upon the winemaker's style, what he or she is trying to achieve in the winemaking style. But it will macerate, or the skins soak on the seed, the skins soak in the juice for a few days to a few weeks, depending upon, again, the style of the wine that's being made. So that's how red wine gets its color, but it's also how it gets its additional polyphenol compounds. Those are coming from the skins and the seeds, right? So that's how you get a higher. And then finally, the second point is organic versus natural. So people commonly ask, well, if I'm drinking organic wine, is that the same as natural wine? And the answer is no. Or if I'm drinking a biodynamic wine, is that the same as a natural wine? The answer is no. It just means that the fruit is either organically or biodynamically farmed. It doesn't mean it's fermented with wild native yeast or that it's additive free. The only regulation on having organic on the bottle is just that the fruit was grown organically, which is better than industrial for sure, right? And better for you than industrial farmed fruit. But it doesn't mean that it is additive free, and it doesn't mean that it is fermented with wild native yeast. So all this is kind of confusing. And since there's no certification for natural wine, when people go in and they're trying to buy wine, it's very confusing to try to find the wines like I've described.
Wow, I just learned so much in that 15 minutes that you were chatting. I had no idea the difference between, I'm not a huge myself wine person. I'm not a huge alcohol person, but my parents love wine. They've been drinking wine forever. And just to note this too, like I said, my parents have been drinking wine for a very long time, and my mom's been drinking your wine. I believe it's probably been over a year now that she's been, getting your boxes delivered monthly, since I introduced her to it. But she still does drink, conventional wine, when she goes to dinner and things like that. So you mentioned, like, with the average American, enjoying more bolder wines like that, she still, and so does my dad, still enjoy your wines too. So I want to kind of just make that clear with the listeners that just because your wines are more natural and are natural and they have maybe a little bit of different, flavor or taste, it's not that they still taste really good. And I can attest that as well. Just from, I feel like I've had your wines at every single conference I've gone to in the last 3 or 4 years. It's always happy hour with Dry Farms. It's probably the best part of the conferences, but that's off topic. But anyway, yeah. So I just learned a ton from everything that you mentioned. And I think you answered a lot of my questions that I actually had. But I did want to talk a little bit about, because I've heard you talk about this in the past in terms of the alcohol content and, how that in itself can cause issues with obviously overall health, but like sleep disruption and hangovers the next day and things like that. So can you chat a little bit about how potentially consuming, a natural wine like yours would be advantageous to kind of help with those types of issues that usually come from alcohol?
Yeah, there are two issues there. I think, and we'll discuss the first one. The first one is alcohol content, right? So our wines are largely believed and thought and witnessed and to be largely hangover free. Well, I think there are two things that are leading to traditional wine hangovers, but the first one is alcohol. And sleep disruption, the first one is alcohol. Mm-hmm. Because what happens when we consume alcohol is we become dehydrated. And this is commonly what wakes people up in the middle of the night, right? And then for a variety of reasons, which have very little to do with the wine, they can't go back to sleep for a while. That has to do with their monkey mind of all the things that they're ruminating about the past or their anxieties of the future, right? That's why they can't go back to sleep, but they wake up from being dehydrated, generally speaking. And so the alcohol is, as I mentioned, a dangerous neurotoxin, and many people shouldn't drink at all, right? And so I'm not here to promote drinking or alcohol. Alcohol ruins millions of lives a year. And many people shouldn't drink at all. But if you choose to drink, or you want to drink, I make a choice to drink. I might be better off if I didn't drink at all. I don't know, but I choose to drink wine. And so, what I try to do is educate people about how to make good choices about your drinking, right? I think you should drink wine because it's low in alcohol, lower than spirits. B, I think you should drink lower alcohol wines. And C, I think you should drink natural wines for the reasons we've already discussed. But this thing with alcohol causes hangovers and causes you to have interrupted sleep patterns. It doesn't matter whether it's our alcohol or somebody else's alcohol. The question is, how much alcohol are you drinking, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you start with a lower alcohol wine, you're going to drink less alcohol and you're going to feel better. You're also going to have a more creative, elevated buzz because the way up is not so fast, right? It's a more gentle buzz that leaves you with greater cognitive connection and a greater creative expression. So the way up is slower, and so the buzz is actually fresher. And then, of course, unless you're consuming several bottles, you're not going to have the same impact as a higher alcohol wine. And the second thing are these additives and sugar. So we know that sugar and alcohol don't make a pretty nasty combination. And the example I could give for you on that is, doesn't sound like you have a lot of alcohol experience per se, but many of your listeners will. If you take a shot of tequila with a lime and some salt, that's a very different feeling and a very different outcome than drinking a margarita. Because margarita is full of sugar. I mean, super full of sugar, usually. And so this sugar and alcohol thing have a particularly nasty combination in a way of leading to a hangover. And so, our wines being sugar-free, conventional wines, not so much. So the sugar-free, the lower alcohol, and then the lack of additives, and then the commercial yeast. Again, we don't know. There's no science. There's no direct evidence about what these additives mean in terms of the way you feel. No one has funded the studies. Anecdotally, what we know for most people is that when they drink a natural wine, they feel better, right? And they experience fewer negative remnants. And so, but it's twofold. It's the alcohol. So lowering the alcohol is very important in determining how you're going to feel. And second of all, getting rid of all the other trash that's in it, the toxins and additives.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I think it's really crazy too, like you mentioned that, all of those, how many did you say additives are?
76.
76. And they don't have to list those anywhere on the bottle?
Here's the thing, and I should have mentioned this earlier in the show. Everything I've told you, including the 76 additives, is not marketing, BS by me. If you want to see the 76 additives, you can simply do a Google search for FDA approved wine additives, and the government's list will come right up. If you want to know about the consolidation of the wine industry, you can simply look at the wine consumption in America, and then you can go and you can search top wine companies in the U.S., and there'll come a list of the largest wine companies and their production, and you can simply divide that production into what Americans drink, and you can see that 52% of all wines are made by just these three giant companies, right? So I mean, it's all. This information I gave you on dry farming and irrigation and water, it's all online. What has not happened before I came along was the consolidation of this information in an educational format to help people make better decisions about drinking wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm glad you clarified that too. So if anybody's listening, they can just do a simple Google search.
I mean, if you're so inclined,
yeah,
it's that I didn't make any of this up. This is not my opinion, right? Yeah. This is fact. Mm-hmm. And so, which is another reason why, our business has been very successful and helped a lot of people, is because, well, also, as you mentioned earlier, like now with the pandemic, of course, there are no conferences, but we're the official wine for virtually every health and performance conference in the world. We did 125 global events in 2019. And many of them, I'm sure that you have attended, that we're the official wine, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. And the reason being, and I think another reason why our company has had great credibility is that we do these wine tastings and my staff is there, and we're just all healthy, right? We're ripped out and, we're in great shape, and like we walk the walk. We live a healthy wellness lifestyle, right? So it's not, as you also know from going to these conferences, and you see many of these people who are representing to be selling these healthy products and so on and so forth. There's nothing healthy about them, right? They don't look healthy. I wouldn't buy anything from them, right? I mean, if you're going to sell me something that you represent is going to improve my health or longevity or wellness, then you should look like it's working for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
just as you do, right? Or boom, bring the gun show in. So it's like, it needs to look like it's working. So I think we have a lot of credibility. We're endorsed by thousands of health leaders and doctors and practitioners and best-selling authors, and so because it works, the product represents itself when you drink it and experience it, and you have this favorable outcome, and it tastes better. And it's friendlier with lighter, fresher food. So, all those things kind of sell the product itself, right? In addition to when people meet us, they know we're authentic. Mm-hmm. So when you're authentic, that makes you more credible. Like in your case, you're very authentic, that makes you super credible. If you tell me that you're practicing something and you believe in it, I look at you and I was like, well, something must be working because she looks radiant and glowing, and and it's all
it's
working
just my
out.
Background light.
Nice.
No, I appreciate that. But yeah, no, it makes total sense. So I do have a few, because I actually posted yesterday on my Instagram to ask a few questions, to ask anybody if they had a few questions for you. Yeah, you answered a lot of them already, but there were two that we didn't dive into. So the first one, someone asked, do your wines have lower levels of histamines than the average wines?
Yes. In fact, we are endorsed by a number of histamine bloggers and influencers. We're the only wine company that has histamine endorsements. And we could get into the science of why. It has most to do with maceration periods on red wines, because particularly women, some men, but it's a more common problem with women who we're at these health conferences. We come in contact with thousands of people at these tastings, and they're like, "Oh, I can't drink red wine. I love red wine, but I can't drink it." Histamines are more of an issue in red wine because it has to do with the skin contact with the juice. And so they're like, "Oh, only drink white wine. I love red wine, but I can't drink it. It makes me stuffy, blotchy, so on and so forth." So our wines are much, much lower in histamine than commercial wines, in part because of the maceration period. So the longer the skin and the seed soak with the juice, the higher the histamine levels become. But that's also what makes a darker, richer, bolder red. So the longer you soak the skins with the juice, the darker the juice becomes. And Americans believe, not true, but Americans believe that the darker a red wine is, the higher the quality. There's no truth to that. In fact, I would represent to you just the opposite is true. But that's a commonly held myth. And so winemakers use color agents, but they also allow the skins and the juice to soak much longer to make it bolder and also darker. And so that's where you get higher histamine levels.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I had no idea. Cool. Okay. So the other question I had or someone asked, let me see here. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Okay. So they asked, and we can kind of talk about where to get your wines from after we talk about this question. They said, do you sell the bottles individually at local stores?
We do not. So the only way you can get a dry farm wine, certified natural wine, is directly from us. We don't sell to restaurants or retailers, and there's a reason for that. The primary reason is that the wines we sell are quite rare and difficult to get, and we can't get enough. We struggle to get enough to satisfy our customers who buy online and ship directly to their door. And so the other thing is the only way we can be certain that the wines are cared for and represented in the correct way is if we handle them only ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So wine is a perishable product. It's affected by temperature and other, shelf time, so on and so forth. The only way we know the quality of what we're shipping out is if we direct ship it ourselves and have complete control over it. But the primary reason is because we can barely get enough wine to satisfy the demand of what consumers have buying directly from us online. So we would never sell to a restaurant or retailer. Now, let me address this before we close up, since we're coming up on top of the hour. How do you find natural wine if you don't buy it from us, right? So I'm not here. I'd love for you to buy wine from us, but what's more important is that you get educated, which I'm trying to do. And number two, that you drink natural wine, whether you get it from us or not. Here's the problem. Natural wines are hard to find, except there are 3 points to that. If you live in a major metropolitan market, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, if you live in a major market, there will be natural wine retailers or natural wine bars in those markets. So New York has the most natural wine retailers of anywhere in the U.S., followed by San Francisco and Los Angeles. So, but other than that, if you live in Kansas City, sorry, game out. You're not going to find natural wine there, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but the primary reason is Americans buy brands. They don't know what these wines are. And so you will find natural wine retailers or bars or restaurants that feature natural wines on their list if you're in a major market. Now, if you're in that major market, you can download a smartphone app called Raisin. It's based out of Europe. Most natural wines are in Europe. But Raisin is a smartphone app, works on Android and iPhone. It's a map-based app that will show you wherever you are, or you can search wherever you're going if there are natural wine retailers, wine bars, or restaurants that sell natural wines in that area. Number two, you can do a Google search for natural wines wherever you are, right? And there may be magazine articles or other indications of where you could find natural wines in your market. Other than that, if you're going into a restaurant and you have no idea and nobody else has any idea about the wines there in terms of how healthy they are, then my second default is to ask for a lower alcohol wine from Europe. So Europeans have 56 additives. They use much fewer of them. So even if it's not a natural wine, a European wine is likely to be healthier and contain fewer additives. And then I told you alcohol is toxic, so I will ask them for, and don't be afraid to ask if they have 8 bottles by the glass, just ask out, can you tell me, I want the lowest alcohol wine you have that's not domestic, right? Mm-hmm. And no domestic wines are going to be low in alcohol, so you don't have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. So that's, and if I'm in the store, I would look for wines from Central France, like Gamay or Beaujolais. Those are going to be typically lower alcohol, lower additives. But it's just a guessing game. It's really just a throw of the dice. You don't really have any idea what you're buying. You just do the best you can within that parameters. Mm-hmm. And then, if you want to buy wine from us, then we have a special offer for your audience. Mm-hmm. So we'll give them a penny bottle of wine with their order. We can't give alcohol away. It's against the law. But for a penny, we'll give them a bottle. And as a gift from you and from us. And they can find that link to getting, I'm sure you'll have it in your show notes, but they can also find that link at dryfarmwines.com, MetFlex Life. So that's dryfarmwines.com/MetFlex Life. And with our wines, they're also very affordable, by the way, for handcrafted wines. So all the wines are priced exactly the same. They're $22 a bottle. And so for a fine handcrafted wine, that's actually a very good value.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So they're not expensive as wine standards go. Mm-hmm. Right? Surely drinking a 22-bottle wine can be an extravagance for some people, but as handcrafted wine products go, that's not expensive. Mm-hmm. So maybe do it for special occasions. Yeah. But anyway, so that's our wines are delivered safe directly to your doorstep as your parents get them on any schedule you want. We have people that get a case a week. We have, customers that get a box a month. They get 6 bottles every other month. They get 6 bottles once a quarter. You can have any amount and any frequency that you like. But generally speaking, most of our customers are regular wine drinkers, right? Mm-hmm. Which our product benefits regular wine drinkers the most because they drink the most.
Yeah.
So they're going to, it sounds like your parents drink wine on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
So regular wine drinkers are going to get the greatest benefit from our product because they drink the most of it. Mm-hmm. And then, it's going to affect how they feel.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And that was all very, very great information just in terms of being able to, I didn't even know any of that you could just look up to see where natural wines are. And I think that was one of my questions too, is, going out to a restaurant. So you answered all those questions. I do have one final question from a listener and then one final question from me, if that's okay. Okay, so the listener asked, and this is something that I was curious about too, what is the difference between, your wines and what we've seen coming out the last few years with FitVine? I know this is a particular company, but can you speak to the differences? Because I know FitVine is in, that's one of the other popular companies out there.
Yeah, I can address that very easily for you.
Yeah.
It's not organic. Nor do they claim it to be organic. It is not natural, nor do they claim it to be natural. And so it's really what I would call a marketing ploy, right?
Okay.
So again, they don't claim that it is organic. I'm telling you it's not organic, nor do they claim that.
Mm-hmm.
It is also not a natural wine, nor do they claim that. They claim it's a FitVine. There are a lot of wines that have come out recently saying we're a clean wine. Well, I don't know what clean means. I know what a natural wine is, right? So, but FitVine is simply, it's, in FitVine's case, I'm sure they're nice people. I don't really know them, but they're commercially available at retail. They're a very large production. They're made in a factory, right? I mean, they're large production scale commercial wines, period. I mean, you can call it what you want, but that's what it is. And I don't think they would dispute that, because they're in retail centers all across the United States, right? They're a large production commercial wine company. They call it FitVine, but the fact of the matter is it's not organic, nor is it natural. It contains additives and it's industrially farmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just explained everything about that in this whole podcast. So,
well, the thing is, they call it one thing, but it's the same as the rest.
Yeah,
right.
Marketing, I guess. Cool. Well, I mean, I just learned a lot, which I always feel like I do when I'm talking to experts like you on the show. And that's why I started the show, just to kind of get education out there on different topics. I know we weren't able to dive into too much nutrition and all of that, but maybe I'll have you back on and we can chat about more of that, more of the biohacking side of things. That would be fun to get into.
Deep into volcanogenesis, heat treatments.
Yeah, we'll have to do a part 2 when we talk. Yeah. We'll talk about that.
Super into
So to end, I always ask this question, kind of putting you on the spot a little bit. But is there anything that you've personally changed your mind about in the last year, and why? And it doesn't have to be, it can be anything you want.
Anything I changed my mind about? I'm struggling to think in the last year anything I've changed my mind about. In the last 5 years, yes, but nothing. My life in the last year has been pretty much the same, and I don't think about. In the last 5 years, we could take that.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I mean, the importance of meditation. I think meditation is the foundation of a well-lived life, and so I didn't understand the power of meditation or the power of silence when I was younger. I mean, I'm 60, and so it's like I'm much older than you and much of your audience. So I didn't realize the power of a regular practice of silence until about 5 or 6 years ago. And so that was life-altering for me. And so meditation was something that was a discovery that radically changed my mind about the difference between striving and thriving, right? The difference in slowing down and letting life come to you as opposed to you chasing it, right? And the power of silence helps open up those channels to receive the abundance that you're due. So, but in the last year, I mean, I just can't think of anything. The last year's been kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Almost a year now since coming up on a year, but in that period, nothing I really changed my mind about.
No, I love that. And I feel like with meditation, actually the same with me in the last 5 years. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. We just got her a doorbell.
Oh, nice.
And so she's ringing the doorbell to tell us she has to go to the bathroom, and now she's barking. But anyway, but yeah, meditation definitely is something that I did not believe in or do any of that, 5 years ago. And that's something that probably in the last 3 years, I've definitely found a lot of power in that as well. So I'm definitely on the same page with you there.
Nice.
But no, that's a good one. Yeah. And it's a hard question, especially for looking back on 2020. But awesome. So yeah, that was great. I definitely, like I said, I learned a lot. I appreciate you taking the time to educate me and our listeners all about wine.
Nice.
Do you want to share? So if anybody wants to try out your wine, they can go to dryfarmwines.com/MetFlex Life. And like I said, like you said, I'll put that in the show notes so they can check it out. Is there anywhere that they can find you, on social media or anywhere else?
On all social, we're Dry Farm Wines everywhere.
Okay.
So we're quite active on social. So
Awesome.
you would see us everywhere.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely link your social media in the show notes as well. And we'll have to chat about coming back on for a part 2 and diving into some more nutrition, fitness side of things. That'll be
Awesome.
fun.
Thanks for having me on today. It's a great time.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.